you know. So the first point, there's a few points. There's basically 3 points for us to make in Alvin Plantinga's free will defense. And once we understand them, we will be able to move forward to the probabilistic version, because if we, and I won't go into as much detail as like philosophers go into this, but I think it'll be enough for us. But there's 3 points for us to make for Alvin Plantinga's free will defense on the probability of the problem of evil. On the logical problem of evil, and then we can move to the probabilistic version. Okay, so his first point is that really a point. I remember when I was a teenager and I had just become a Christian, and another teenager who had gone to church camp with me, we were talking about God and stuff in the locker room at school. We had our clothes on. We just hang out there and talk, you know, and throw balls off and make them bounce off the wall, because that was fun. And we're in there just messing around, and then like it ends up just being me and him, and we're talking about God, and you know, he brings this up. He's like, you know, why doesn't God stop bad things from happening? And I said, well, free will, you know, he gives us free will to choose between good and bad. And my friend said, but God could, you know, fix it so that we have free will and nobody ever does anything wrong. And I was like, that just didn't make any sense to me. I didn't really go into any explanation, but I didn't buy it. I was like, I think I'd rather have my free will. Like, you know, it really is like, the thing about that is you get into these things called omnipotence paradoxes, which are basic concepts of theology, which is like, could God create a rock too big for God to pick up? You know, or how about this? Could God create a married bachelor? Or could God create a you know, a world where 1 + 1 makes 7? Okay. Well, the thing is, 1 + 1 = 2 is really just a way of saying 2 = 2. This is what's called an analytic truth, what David Hume called it. And an analytic truth is like 1 + 1 is just another way of writing 2. So 2 = 2. I think we all recognize that like 2 = 2 and 2 does not equal 7. You know, because of what 2 is and what 7 is. So there's no world, there's no way God, you know, could make it so that 2 = 2. You know, and the classic example of this is like, and the reason we say that is we say it's logically impossible, which is another way of saying it's not a meaningful concept. That isn't anything to create or not create. It's just not a thing. Okay, so like there is no essence to that. There is no essence of what that world would be. What is that world? It doesn't have a definition, so it can't be created because it isn't even a concept. You know, and the classic example is like, could God create a rock too big for God to lift? You know, because then God wouldn't be all powerful if he couldn't create the rock, but he wouldn't be all powerful if he could create the rock, because then he couldn't pick it up. And people think, well, there we've disproved God with this omnipotence paradox. But the problem with that omnipotence paradox is what you're doing is you're asking if God has the power of not having a power. Does God have the power of not having a power? But not having a power is not a power. You know, it's just, why should I include not having a power on my as one of my list of God's many powers? That's just irrational. Now, you could alternatively say, so it's not a problem if you say God can't do it, but you could alternatively just say, well, all right, if you want to have the other way, you could just say like, well, God could do the logically impossible. Okay, then he can make the rock and he can pick it up, and it's not, you know, and it's not really a problem because God can do the logically absurd, you know, or the meaningless. But I think the problem is people want to say something irrational just for when they need it. and then go back to being rational. So it's like, because they'll say, well, there's no way he could pick the rock up because that would be irrational. It's like, yeah, but your basic idea of having the power of not having a power is irrational. Yeah. Or logically impossible. Okay. So the same thing applies to human freedom. You know, if we have free will, that means God doesn't control what we do. If he controls what we do, then we don't have free will. Okay. So there's that first point. And that is a basic theology point. It's one of those things that, like, if you haven't heard it before, it's going to be tough to understand, and you need time to think about it, and, like, you may have to pause this video and come back. But if you've heard it before, we can move forward. Because once you get it, it's like, okay, it's not that bad. The next point is like, okay, human evil I get. So, like, you know, we have a world with free will. But what about, like, bad things that happen that no human did? Like if something bad happens to you, like in Job, you know, a tornado comes and, like, there's no bad people that do this. You know, it's not like the bad people come and steal all his money and run off all his, like, probably slaves, but, you know, people that worked for him. And I don't know, but, like, it doesn't say that in Job, but, like, his children are all destroyed in one big tornado. They're all at one house having a big party, all his kids, and they're having a good time, and then a mighty tornado comes and, like, knocks the house down and it kills them all. And one guy escapes to come tell Job what happened. Okay, so, like, in that situation, you know, or things like the Bubonic Plague that spread across Europe and really the world. I think the estimate is it killed 50% of humanity. In Europe, there were, like, 3 waves of it in the course of, like 5 years or so, where, like, 30 to 60% of people died. So 3 out of 10, or as much as 6 out of 10, you know, or like 1 in 3, you know, on the low end, died. That's awful. And in those days, everyone was saying, oh, this was because there was so much sin, and this is God punishing us, you know, because of all the sin, you know. And, like, or like when AIDS happened, you know, and, like, it was mostly affecting homosexuals, and you had Christian pastors saying, oh, this is because this is God's curse on homosexuality. He's finally destroying, you know, he's punishing homosexuals. Like, those kind of the problem with those arguments is it's like, well, why would God, if God's benevolent and God loves us, why would God do things like that to us? And oftentimes it seems like there's no good explanation. There's no good karma explanation, really. Like, what about all the homosexuals who lived before AIDS, who got away scot-free? That doesn't seem fair. You know, or what about all the people in Europe who lived before the plague and lived their whole lives just fine and dandy? Like in the 1200s, the plague comes in the 1300s, but in the 1200s it was a time of plenty, and there was, like, there were high temperatures, the crops were higher, there was a lot of building, there was high population, you know, and then you have these, like, horrible cold years that kill their crop levels that don't come back. They don't come back to the 1200 levels until the 1700s. And then they have the Bubonic Plague and all this stuff, you know. And, like, what about all the other people? You know, was it fair, you know, to them? You know, it doesn't really seem like there's a rhyme or reason to it. Like natural event disasters just occur, and you can't put this simple karma explanation on it. And what they do in India is they just say, oh, it's past life, you know, and then that fixes it, right? Because you can just create this past life that there's no way for us to really know who got reincarnated as who, and it's not like we remember who all lived and what exactly they did in all through human history, some sort of tally book about who did what bad thing. We don't have that. So, but anyway, Plantinga's free will defense just says, basically he pulls the idea from Job, really, demons. It could be demons. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. Like, well, that's fine if it's ridiculous. As long as it's logically possible, then you haven't proven that it's logically impossible for God to exist and evil to exist. Because, like in Job, the devil, if God cares about the free will of humans, then he also cares about the free will of his spiritual beings. And they have powers and abilities to do things that we don't. They can make tornadoes and stuff. And tsunamis and AIDS. They could. So, like, it's the same thing applies. If you're going to say that, like, free will means that there have to be murderers in the world, then there also have to be demonically caused natural disasters. It's is it logically, is it probable? Well, that's a different question. Maybe you say that that's incredibly unlikely, that it's 99.9% chance that that's not it, and that you're irrational for believing in the demon explanation. But there's the rub. That's the probability version of the problem of evil, not the logical version. The logical version just needs that 0.00001% possibility is all you need. And then you haven't proven that God can't possibly exist. You're only demonstrating that he probably doesn't exist, which is a whole other argument that we can have. Okay? We can have that argument too. But this is the ground that the atheists have conceded after centuries of pressing in their stronghold that it's logically impossible for God and evil to coexist. Now they say, well, it is logically possible. It's just improbable. It's like, oh, okay. All right. So anyway, there's a third point for the free will defense, and it's just that we all recognize in our lives that some goods outweigh some bads. That the bad can be outweighed by a greater good. This is a point that Paul makes in Romans 8. And we do this every day in life. We all go through things that we don't enjoy, that we don't like. But in Romans 8:18, Paul says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The weight of glory, I think, is what it says, really. But, and he's talking about the problem of evil here. He says, the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation, that's the universe, was subjected to frustration. Not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. That would be God. It's not our fault, really, that life is terrible. God did it. Why did God do it? God did it in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. That the suffering we face in this life is actually like achieving a greater good in salvation, bringing people to Christ. And oftentimes that's the case. That God has some, overarching plan. One way to think about this is when you were a kid and they sent you to school to learn to read, that was a pain to learn to read, and you hated it. But now that you're an adult, do you really think it wasn't worth it? You don't even it's not even a question. It's not even worth comparing, as Paul puts it. So the point that I'm making here about that is just since God is an all-knowing being, then God's knowledge can extend so far into the future that God can understand larger and larger plans that there's no way, we can really... God could have morally sufficient reasons. One example of this, to help us think about this, one more illustration to help us think about this is evangelism is basically sharing. It's the process of attempting to lead people to Christ. Christ convicts them, they accept Christ, and the end goal of evangelism for Christians is to see people become Christians, become disciples of Christ. That's what, if you're doing evangelism as a Christian, that's what that task is. You want to, that is success in that task. You want to see that happen. Now, you don't control what people do, but you try everything you can to see what you can do to move in that direction. And you share, the main thing you're going to do is share with people exactly what they have to do to become a Christian. What does that look like? How do you do that? What do you do? What do you have to believe to become a Christian? And that's really more of a Christian question. But the thing is, who is the greatest evangelist the world has ever seen? Well, human evangelist. In terms of what we can measure, what we really know from sociological data, in terms of basically the quality of the disciples created and the quantity of how many were created. Is it the Apostle Paul? Actually, no. Is it Billy Graham? Actually, no. Everyone that was converted at a Billy Graham crusade, for example, I think the research from what I saw from Rodney Stark was that there's no actual examples of a mass conversion, a mass on-the-spot conversion, except for the one that's recorded in Acts at Pentecost. That's the only one that's even recorded or claimed. Like every other time you see, like at a Billy Graham crusade, a bunch of people come down the aisle and accept Jesus, they're actually already being worked on by friends and family, and this is like the culmination of a process. It's not just like a on-the-spot, people who weren't thinking about Jesus at all hear a big sermon, and then all of a sudden, we're all Christians now. There's, and that's true for like everything. There's just no examples of mass conversions like that. Except for the one in Acts. And Stark claims that like the one in Acts probably, he thinks it probably didn't happen. Even though he's a Christian, he thinks that the numbers were inflated or something. But the point I'm trying to make is that the greatest Christian evangelist who ever lived was Mao Zedong. No question. The growth rate of Christianity under his horrible, I think it's something like 20 million people he had killed during his like Cultural Revolution phase. I've heard it's like 50 to 60 million people overall in China. But like that Cultural Revolution phase was like extreme, and they banned religion. And what it did was it took Christianity that was there and turned it into Chinese Christianity. It went from being this external thing that a few Chinese people are like, converted to. Yeah, I'm a Christian, but it's like I'm copying those Westerners or those Christians from outside. But after Mao Zedong, it's the Chinese church. It's Chinese Christianity. We've undergone horrible persecution. He banned religion in general. And Christianity saw a growth rate that was double that of the first, 400 years of the church, or 350 years, I think. So from Pentecost all the way up to when it was over half the Roman Empire, I think it's like 3.4 or something percent a year, or it's something like 10% every decade, 10% a decade of growth. And you're looking at double that during communist oppression in under Mao Zedong. And so my point is this: if God can do something I'm not saying that that's why God allow those bad things to happen. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is things can lead to things that you didn't think would lead to those things. So the results of things can be not what they appear to be at first. Something that we thought was good can end up leading to very bad things. So much bad that we would rather just not have the good in the first place. And something that was bad can lead to so much good down the road that it seems like totally worth it. Okay.